Hey everybody, welcome back to the Nerdy 30s review. I'm Jason, and today we are diving into our comparative review of the NVIDIA RTX 4070 Super versus the AMD RX 7900 GRE, otherwise known as the Golden Rabbit Edition. And the Shiny Bunny was only released in China previously, but then it got a price cut and a global release. Now, it is very fortunate for us that is the case because of all of the graphics cards I've had the pleasure of playing on this generation. These two are hands down my favorite. Now, I don't mean to say that they are the most performant. I'm just saying for what you get for your money, these are the best graphics cards of this generation, in my personal opinion. Now, we can talk about where the mid-tier, like the 70 class graphics cards are going in terms of price performance, but that's kind of a dead end. Like, these are the asking prices. The 4070 Super is coming in at $599 MSRP, and then the AMD, the 7900 GRE is coming in at $549. So while there's a $50 differential, obviously aftermarket cards are going to fluctuate. So the models that I chose were about $10 to $20 over MSRP, and that's what I like to really kind of hone in on. Like, what additional features can you get for a couple extra bucks, and is it worth it? Now, for the models that I looked at, I would say hands down yes to both. So let's just go ahead and meet our contestants. First off, we have the Gigabyte Gaming OC RTX 4070 Super. This one came in at 20 bucks over MSRP, and in my opinion, hands down worth it. We have a really great aftermarket cooler. This thing is as quiet comes. Honestly, I can't believe I'm going to say this about a Gigabyte graphics card, but this one had no coil whine that I could actually hear. It was the quietest in terms of coil whine that I have ever come across on a graphics card, and I was incredibly impressed by it. As far as feature sets, it does have a dual BIOS here. We've got a silent mode as well as gaming OC, and BIOS was really quiet. Both fan speed and aggressive fan curve, this was really quiet. Not quite as quiet as the AMD counterpart, which we'll meet here in a second, but just very quiet, very performant. It's a pretty simple shroud. It's got a black plastic front with the 3 fans. The one in the middle spins in a different direction. Back plate here, we've got a nice metal back plate. We've got a flow through here for the heat fins. Pretty simple design. So yeah, really great card. I absolutely loved it. If you have the extra 20 bucks to spend, you know, $619 over the $599, I definitely recommend it. Just if for no other reason, it is so cool and it's so damn quiet. Oh my gosh. But yeah, in the red corner, what we have is the Sapphire. Sapphire, yes. Pure RX 7900 GRE. Now, this one, oh my gosh, I forgot just how quality the build is on most Sapphire cards. Like, it has been a really long time since I played on a Sapphire card, and the additional 10 bucks is what it was. So MSRP was $549. This one was purchased for $559. This is hands down worth it. I know basically what most people would say is you're paying for the white paint coat because it has basically the same cooler as the Pulse, but the Pulse comes in black. But this one actually has a slightly higher overclock. It's marginal at best, but I mean, we're just being honest here. As far as feature sets go, we can disable. There is an LED light switch right here that you can enable or disable. There's no RGB. It is literally just a red glow here. And I mean, it looks good. If you want to build a full white build, this is a great graphics card for it. If you're in the mid tier, only 10 bucks more for the white paint coat. And this guy overclocks a treat. Oh my gosh. What I was able to get out of this was pretty impressive. You know, we'll get into the actual measurements between the two, but of course, the NVIDIA graphics card does have the 16-pin 12-volt power adapter, whereas the AMD card is just the 2 8-pin. But these are both incredible graphics cards. I cannot stress. The 10 bucks is easily worth it because it overclocks so much better, and it actually has a lot higher base clock than the reference edition and a slightly higher boost. These both have 4% increases over the reference boost. We'll get into the actual like metrics and the slides, but of the currently released graphics cards, like the AIB models, these are both strong recommendations for me. So if you want a 4070 Super, you don't want to spend too much, definitely consider the Gigabyte card. If like flash is not too important to you, same with the Pure. If you want to do a white build, you want to do a black build, get a Pulse. You'll save 10 bucks, but like the additional 10 bucks plus what you get just in the Sapphire build quality is phenomenal. So
yeah.
absolutely amazing cards. Let's just get into the system specifications, and we'll get into those benchmarks, and we'll get into my final thoughts. But thank you so much for everything you guys do, for watching the video, for taking the time. You're a great community. If you enjoy content like this, leave a like on this video, subscribe to my channel. It really, really helps. Let's just get into it. All right, before we go ahead and dive into that sweet benchmark footage, why don't we go ahead and familiarize ourselves with both the test bench configuration as well as the hardware specifications and overclocks that we used on both these monster GPUs that we're looking at today. So for the test bench configuration, we are running a Ryzen 9 7950X3D on an MSI X670E Carbon Wi-Fi motherboard. For memory, we've got 64 gigabytes of G-Skill Trident Z Neo running at 6,000 mega transfers. Power supply that we're running is a Corsair 1000 watt RME model. And the case that we're sitting everything in is the Fractal North Chalk White Mesh. Intake fans, we've got two 140 millimeter Arctic PWM fans and one exhaust, which is a 120 millimeter Noctua high airflow fan. In the green corner, we have the Gigabyte Gaming OC RTX 4070 Super. We're up from 5888, weighing in at 7168 CUDA cores. The base clock is the same as the reference at 1980 megahertz. Boost is 4% up to 2565. 12 gigabytes of GDDR6X on a 192-bit bus. No surprises there. 224 tensor cores and 56 dedicated ray tracing cores. This is a ray tracing beast. Measurements, we're looking at 3000 millimeters by 130 by 58, or 11.8 inches by 5.1 inches by 2.3 inches. So a beefy card, but the cooling performance you get out of it is second to none. Ports, we're looking at 3 DisplayPort 1.4s and 1 HDMI 2.1. TDP is 220 watts. Now, one thing that's not pictured here, as well as the overclocking information, which I will read to you, is the Gigabyte Gaming OC. Every Gigabyte card that I've seen from this generation has a 4-year warranty on it. And everything that I've read and heard from people that I know and trust says that Gigabyte has really upped their warranty game since their snafus out of the 3000 series. And there was those exploding power supplies that we had a couple of generations back. So glad to see them getting some ground back there. Now, for the overall overclock that was performed, overclock and undervolt for this 4070 Super. So when we go into synthetic benchmarks, we're going to have stock, which is just out of the box, and all of our in-game performance that we're going to see, both rasterized and ray traced, is going to be your overclocked numbers. So for the 4070 Super, I was able to get a stable 2750 megahertz on core. I was able to increase memory by 1200 megahertz, and the undervolt was down to 970 millivolts. It was so smooth. I was just shocked at how well both of these cards performed as far as overclocking and undervolting. They were really, really stable all the way down. I had to be kind of comical, to get some crashes out of them, but yeah, both performed really well. So moving on over to the red corner. So weighing in at 5120 stream processors, a base clock of over 13% over reference at 1448. The boost clock is 2333, which is like the 4070 Super, just 4% over reference. Both of these, as I said, overclock really well. 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 running on a 256-bit bus. We have 320 TMUs or texture mapping units and 80 dedicated ray tracing cores. Measurements. We're looking at 320 millimeters by 129 by 53, or 12.6 by 5.1 by 2.1 inches. So longer, but thinner, whatever your preference is. Ports, I really appreciated, and I didn't bring it up in the intro, but I'm glad that I'm thinking about it now. We've got 2 DisplayPort 2.1s and 2 HDMI 2.1s. For me, somebody who just moves their rig everywhere and just plugs it into random TVs and monitors, it's nice to have that versatility. TDP is 275 watts. Now, for overclocking and undervolting, what I was able to do with this one, I was able to get a stable 2850 megahertz out of the core. I was able to undervolt it down to 980 millivolts, and VRAM was 2416, which is just 100 megahertz over when it was previously locked. I was able to enable fast timings. I was able to get a stable 2600 megahertz on RAM, but performance actually lagged behind. I don't know what it is about this generation overclocking the memory, but maybe I'm just bad at it, but I've not been able to get good confident numbers, whereas I just get a better overclock on core, and for whatever reason that performs better than higher VRAM speeds, but that's where we're at. So yeah, With that in mind, let's just go ahead and move on into synthetic benchmarks. Like I said, we'll have core and then we'll have overclocked, and then gaming performance is going to be all overclocked, undervolted performance. So let's just dive on in to synthetics. Firestrike Extreme is going to be our highest lead out of the GRE, and it gives us both a 5% lead at stock, and once overclocked, a 6.1% lead, going from 279.29 down to the 263.18 out of the 4070 Super. Now, Firestrike Extreme is DX11 1440p max settings. Time Spy is DX12 1440p. Like, that's what it's trying to synthesize, I guess you would say. And while the GRE holds onto a lead, it's pretty marginal. At stock, it's a 0.25% lead. And then once we overclock things, we're up to a 1.3% lead at 21,616 versus 21,331. It's really, really neck and neck. I was genuinely impressed. I thought once we got things overclocked that the GRE would just run away with things, but the 4070 Super kept up well in synthetics. And then obviously when we move into the ray tracing focus, we're going to see things switch on us. So big lead at stock for Port Royal, 11% and then 12% respectively once we overclock things. So I was pleasantly surprised. But when we moved over to Speedway is DirectX 12 Ultimate, which includes ray tracing, and there we just see a dominant performance out of the 4070 Super, 23% at stock and then 25% performance lead over the 7900 GRE by the 4070 Super. So that's 58.27 versus 46.58. So both respectable scores, but yeah, ray tracing, and as we'll see in gaming, it's pretty much all in the 4070's court there. Moving on over to gaming performance, however, we're looking at 1440p rasterized here to kick things off. Plague Tale Requiem is neck and neck. It is margin of error, both at 107 frames per second. Super keeps things a little tidier with the 1% lows at 83.6 versus 78.2, but both ultimately really playable at 1440p. Banishers is a game that I've recently taken to. It's got a nice story narrative, but it's a close race here at 1440p with just a minor 1.6 lead, 1.6% lead for the 4070 Super. Things kind of switch when we get over to Star Wars Jedi Survivor. We see a 3.5% lead for the GRE, and then nice tidier 1% lows at 75.6 versus 64.8, but both really playable, honestly. Hogwarts Legacy, we see the trend continue with a 4.8% lead for the GRE over the 4070 Super. Both, like I said, all of these games at 1440p are just really playable on both. But moving on over to Helldivers, spreading democracy everywhere, we have a 3.7% lead for the GRE over the 4070 Super at 119 versus 115. Moving on over to Alan Wake, we do see the lead switch marginally, but 1.6% is the lead, 69.6 versus 68.5, both over 60 frames, and that's where you'd want to see them. Horizon Forbidden West, we see things switch back over to the GRE at 11.7%, 110 versus 98, both really good. That game plays so well on PC. I really enjoy it. Moving on over to my favorite new GPU benchmark crusher, Skyrim Nulvis. I do want to have a quick note here. The 4070 Super for the Twin Edge, that particular review, my focus, my feature one for that, had us about 60 frames per second. That was due to a memory configuration issue I have since addressed. So these are the accurate numbers we're seeing. The GRE does have a 5% lead though at 95.3 versus 90.7. Returnal, we see our largest lead, I believe, out of the GRE at 1440p at a flat 12%, 143.6 versus 127.9. Moving on over to 4K rasterized, I kind of expected the GRE to take things away here with that additional 4 gigabytes of RAM, but the 4070 Super kept things competitive, as we'll see here. Plague Tale Requiem, we are seeing a larger lead from marginal to 9%, 63.2 versus 58.1. Percentages are kind of deceptive in that, like, when you get down to those small numbers, like at around 60, it's just, you're talking about 5 frames, but suddenly you're talking about 10%. So that's what we're looking at. Banishers was an anomaly. We saw the 4070 Super just carry things away at 99.4 versus 82.3, a 20% advantage for the 4070 Super. Things switch back over to the GRE at Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which is 56.4 up from 45.4, which is a 24% advantage for the GRE. Helldiver stays marginal, a 2% lead for the 4070 Super, or not, sorry, excuse me, the 7900 GRE at 78.8 versus 77.3. Alan Wake 2 remained really tight with a 4% advantage going to the 4070 Super. Neither one of them are super duper playable, but they are 30 frames per second if you want to count that. Horizon Forbidden West, the lead holds and extends actually to 15% for the GRE, 73.1 versus 63.4. Skyrim Novus, this is pretty shaky for both of them, but around 50 frames per second, giving the GRE a 16% lead. Now, Returnal also maintains a 16% lead at 81.8 versus 70.6. So we do kind of see that additional 4 gigabytes of RAM like come in handy in some of these titles. And I believe that that's a trend that will continue. Like, this is speculation. It's just an opinion. And obviously DLSS makes up for more than a couple of frames there. So yeah. Okay, before we go ahead and get into the ray tracing benchmark performance, I do want to have a really brief aside. Now, I'm not going to take too much time. I just wanted to get a couple quick things off my chest. Now, firstly is a confession. The GRE is the first AMD graphics card that I've legitimately ray traced on. And when I mean legitimately, I mean just enabled features across every game that has them, see what they could do. And the only reason I did that was because I was doing a comparative review against an NVIDIA graphics card. Now, that's unacceptable for someone like me who is such a large proponent of seeing what your graphics card can do, seeing what your PC hardware can do. That's one of the beautiful things about being a PC gaming enthusiast, is pushing your hardware to see what it can really do. Don't just accept what's written on the box. Like, get it in there, undervolt, overclock, see what you can do. And the fact that I did not even give AMD the benefit of the doubt and flicking that switch to see what features I could have. And now that I've had my eyes open to the wonders of ray tracing, even in lighter workloads, like, it makes a genuine impact and immersion. And I, like so many other people, have kind of fallen prey to a public misconception about AMD graphics cards, specifically the 7000 series, and that AMD just sucks at ray tracing. Now, while no one is, like, no major tech outlet has outright said this, invariably in every tech review that I've seen or read, as they're summing things up, and it's almost like almost unilaterally exactly the same words, if ray tracing is important to you, just go NVIDIA. And while there is some truth in that statement, right, there's some backing as far as factual, like, we're under no illusions that the 4070 Super is going to be beaten by the 7900 GRE and ray tracing performance, but that does not mean that the GRE cannot give you acceptable frames with ray tracing on. We've become so hyper focused on like which is simply the best, we don't really attribute like the actual performance like goals that we're looking for. So like a steady 60 frames per second with tight 1% lows, sure, you may get 70 or even 80 from the 4070 Super, but if you're genuinely like trying to weigh which graphics card you want to go with, and like $50 is like a bridge too far, and you just outright won't get a GRE simply because you're like, well, I might want to turn on ray tracing one day. Like, I want it to be stated that yes, we're going to get into those slides, and yes, the 4070 Super is going to be superior in ray tracing performance, but I don't want that to simply overshadow the fact that both graphics cards provide really, really acceptable and in some cases great frame rates at 1440p with all ray tracing features enabled. So yeah, I'm not trying to like sway one way or the other. It's just something I believe needs to be said because yeah, I never enabled ray tracing, and there's a lot of there's a lot to be said about ray tracing. There's a lot of things to be excited about in ray tracing, and to simply not enable them because I'm running an AMD graphics card is just bonkers. I mean, if we look at it logically, they're performing at about the same level of ray tracing performance as the 3000 series from NVIDIA. So like those weren't like slouches when it came to ray tracing. So yeah, that's all I really wanted to say. Let's just get back into the benchmarks. All right, so getting into those ray tracing benchmarks that we were talking about, this is about what we'd expect. So no real big surprises here. Don't feel too alarmed. 51.4 out of Cyberpunk 2077 4070 Super versus 41.1 does give it a flat out 25% edge over the GRE. It's what we expected, but still 41.1 with all of that ray tracing enabled. It's respectable out of the GRE, honestly. Moving on over to Ghostwire Tokyo, we've got almost 80 frames, 79.7 versus the GRE 61.6 gives the 4070 Super a 29% advantage. Moving on over to Star Wars Jedi Survivor, things really tighten up, however. We're going from 77.1 down to 69.8, giving the Super only a 10% advantage in ray tracing. It is a lighter ray tracing load, and to be perfectly honest, the GRE in rasterized performance does perform a lot better than the 4070 Super there. So that's kind of what we're seeing there. And this does continue over into Hogwarts Legacy, which is the one upset the GRE is able to provide in ray traced performance. 65.5 versus 64.2, giving it a 2% lead in ray tracing performance. Now, I want to be 100% transparent with you. The reason that we have this upset is simply because 4070 Super, for whatever reason, struggles in Hogsmeade. And I run a very comprehensive benchmark for every game that I play. So I go to every region and we just average things out. There's a substantial dip in performance in Hogsmeade for the 4070 Super. I've tried it on 2 different 4070 Supers on 2 different test bench configurations. It persists beyond both. So that's likely what you're seeing. Overall, we would say in 99% of other regions, the 4070 Super has better ray tracing performance, but in the averages, GRE takes the win. Moving on over to Spider-Man Remastered, we've got a tight race, but 139.8 does give the advantage to the 4070 Super over the 128.8 we see there. Alan Wake 2, neither one of these is really playable. I guess you could probably make a bid saying that 30 frames per second is 30 frames per second, but the frame counter was all over the place for that. So we have a 39% lead, but obviously we're talking small numbers there. So 22.4 versus 31.2. Avatar's Frontiers of Pandora is an AMD sponsored title, but ray tracing is simply part of it. So this is ultra settings and therefore ultra ray tracing. We have a lead for the 4070 Super of 16%. So both of them are pretty playable. Truthfully, they're both over 60 frames per second, and the Radeon card is darn close to 70. So both really good there. Control, like I said, there's really no like scale for this, so it's just all ray tracing has been enabled for it, no upscaling obviously, and so we've got a 24% lead for the 4070 Super at 77.1 versus 62.1. Now Returnal is a really close one too, with a 13% lead for the 4070 Super at 98 frames per second versus the GRE's 86.4. As you can see, 1% lows follow in trends with rasterized performance, so there's really nothing that sticks out there. Both of these cards are really good ray tracing cards for the money. The 4070 Super is just outright superior in every instance. We have one Pyrrhic victory for the Hogwarts Legacy on the GRE, but outside of that, yeah, the 4070 Super just kind of takes this whole bracket. Now, the last thing we really want to talk about from benchmarking perspective is power draw and thermals. Now, both of these cards do really well at idle. We've got 18 watts from the 4070 Super and a 27 watts. Both of these are the overclocks and undervolts, so it's nice to see. Both of them are pretty low, but obviously we do see a 60 watt difference between the 4070 Super under load 241 to 301. This is just on average. These are the recorded spikes. So 285 up to 362, those 20% or those 20 millisecond spikes that we see are substantial. They aren't the 7900 XTX spikes, but they are still very common, and overall power draw is higher than that 301 denotes. This is just what I had sustained. If I got to figure out a better way to calculate overall power draw, including spikes, rather than just the averages of what I'm seeing running. So as far as temps and hotspot, they are both just neck and neck. And this is what I'm saying about these cards being so competitive is so overall temps for both, they were both under 70 70 degrees Celsius, and then hotspot temperatures are 82 and 81 respectively. So they both stayed really, really cool. Both of these cards are incredible at what they do as far as the aftermarket heat sinks, cooling. They're put together really well. So definitely big kudos to both Sapphire and Gigabyte. I am genuinely impressed with that. So yeah, with all this information out in front of us, why don't we go ahead and move on to final thoughts and close this thing out. Okay, so wrapping things up, final thoughts real quick here. Price performance, that's the one we're first going to look at. It's a really, really tight race at $549 for the GRE versus $599 for the 4070 Super. So $50, it's a pretty small dividing line between the two, and it's going to be a blurry line too once we get closer and closer to the release of the new graphics cards from both NVIDIA and AMD. I feel like we'll probably see better sales from AMD, just if history is going to dictate anything. So we'll just go ahead and give the points as far as like overall price. We'll give the nod to AMD because I believe that it's going to be cheaper now and it'll be cheaper a year from now. Since we already put some points there, we'll just go ahead and continue on with what I like about the GRE. Now, obviously, it overclocks and undervolts a little bit better than the 4070 Super. It's a marginal lead, but it's a lead nonetheless. As far as rasterized performance, both at 1440p and 4K, we pretty consistently see anywhere from 5 to 15% on the GRE. And if the history of driver set is going to be any indicator, I believe that's a lead that will probably only extend. And if we're looking longevity as well, 16 gigabytes of VRAM is probably going to suit us a little bit better as more games start to require additional resources, VRAM specifically. And as we've had the console discussion before, 16 gigabytes is kind of the standard, like the minimum requirements for a lot of next generation games, and that might prove to be a problem for the 4070 Super going forward. Now, I may catch some flack for this last point. I prefer Adrenaline software to NVIDIA GeForce Experience. I just do. I like the feature set. I like Hyper RX. I am really a fan of everything that AMD is pushing out. They've got a lot in line, and I feel like they're only going to gain. They're hungry for the gaming market. So that said, I mean, obviously never buy a promise, especially never buy a promise from AMD because HyperX was super late, and we've been promised things before. But I like the trajectory, and I liked the software. I like Adrenaline software over NVIDIA GeForce Experience. I like that I can legitimately overclock and undervolt specifically within that API. I don't have to leverage MSI like I do with NVIDIA. But it's a small thing, but it's a personal preference thing, and it gives points to the GRE. Outside of that, like this card in particular is a great card. So it's really like an apples and apples between these two. Their models are both exceptional. So like we're not going to nitpick the hardware perspective there. Now, all that said, like if these things are important, if this is great and you want to try ray tracing, you want to be 1440p round about 60 frames per second, in most titles, this guy will get you there. So like their ray tracing performance is nothing to sneeze at. It performed admirably. It did not beat the 4070 Super outside of one title in a very marginal lead, and the only reason it did is because Hogsmeade, for some reason, the 4070 Super had some real tough trouble there. But a win is a win there. But yeah, outside of that, like this is a great graphics card. It's a great price performer. I like Adrenaline software. I like the 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and I love how well it overclocked. Now, moving over to Team Green, it cannot be overstated. DLSS is king as far as upscaling is concerned. There's a major feather in NVIDIA's cap, and that is at 1440p. Obviously, it's more prevalent in 4K, but at 1440p, it is even now becoming the standard simply to have DLSS enabled, because there are some people, and it's a larger it's a community that's growing larger and larger by the day, that genuinely believe that frames generated by DLSS are superior to native, and that's no other GPU manufacturer can say that, and that is huge. Cannot be overlooked or overstated. Another major win for this. It is even for as large as it is a much more power efficient graphics card, and while they both performed basically at a tie as far as thermals are concerned, 100 watts if you game a lot, or if you leverage this as a workstation GPU, like that 100 watts adds up, and like you'll eventually like pay the difference between these cards. over time in your electricity bill. So that it can't be overstated either. The other big one is obviously ray tracing. Like, sure, the GRE is a great ray tracing performer, but I'm not going to say the words, but the 4070 Super is vastly superior in ray tracing performance. If you want to play those ray tracing love letter games, Alan Wake 2 with all features enabled, Cyberpunk 2077 with all features enabled. If you want to play Control with all features enabled and just enjoy it without really having to worry about anything, this is the recommendation, truthfully. Outside of that, I'm not saying that GeForce Experience is bad. It is still like the one-click optimization is something that has been a feather in their cap for a long time, and it still is. But it is a great graphics card. It performs really well, and even on that 12 gigabytes of VRAM on the 192-bit bus, like, it doesn't hinder it at all. It remained competitive when overclocked and undervolted. It didn't scale quite as good, but it was really neck and neck with the GRE all throughout the rasterization tests, and that's something to be said, genuinely, because this is a Navi 31 card. I mean, sure, it's cut down all to heck, but this is a great graphics card, and the 70 tier graphics card to really trade blows the way it did is genuinely impressive. So between the two, like, they are both incredible graphics cards. I don't think you can go wrong with either. If rasterized performance is more your thing, if you want to really get in there and tune things, I would probably give the nod to the GRE. If ray tracing performance, especially going forward, and if you want to play that handful of games, you know, then the 4070 Super probably gets the nod. If it were me, like, I can't. I tried. Like, I have re-recorded this bit I don't know how many times, and I have picked a different one each time. So it is, you can't go wrong with either. I love them both. If I had to throw one of these in my system, it would be my gaming system. Like, I would not be disappointed. So go with what you think is important. If you want additional ray tracing performance, this is probably your card. If you want that additional insurance policy of the 16 gigabytes of VRAM, you want to make your money go a little bit further in rasterized performance, ray tracing isn't quite a big deal, then yeah, the GRE is your card. But they're both great cards. This has been a great experience. This has been the most fun I've had benchmarking and just like playing on GPUs since I started this. So yeah, I feel really blessed. So if you enjoyed this content, please feel free to leave a like, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out more than you know. You guys are an amazing community. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one.